Okay, you've bought your first traditional bow. Now it's time to get your arrows. Now the arrows are more important than the bow. You can have the best bow money can buy, but if your arrows are not spined correctly, or don't weigh enough, or are crooked, you're not going to be able to hit anything. So it's very critical that you match your arrows to your bow. Now that doesn't mean you've got to buy expensive arrows. In fact, I recommend getting really affordable, inexpensive arrows and components when you start out, because you wouldn't know the difference between the top of the line and the cheap stuff at first. The better you get, then you might want to do that. But I would start out with just the most economical, basic components you can get. The three main materials that arrows are made out of is carbon, aluminum, and wood. They all have their good points and they all got their bad points. But since you're starting out, I would stick with carbon. Wood is really neat. I've shot a lot of that, but you've got some issues with that. It's throwing too many variables into the pot when you're starting out. Aluminum arrows are very good, very consistent, but they do bend. I recommend either starting out with aluminum or carbon, but my suggestion would be to start out with carbon arrows. When you buy your arrows, you want to make sure that they are the proper spine. Now the way you do that, you want to know your bow poundage and your draw length, and a lot of times they ask you for your tip weight as well. Now the spine is basically the stiffness of the arrow. You can see that arrow flexes right there. Now a stiffer spined arrow will not flex as much. The more powerful the poundage of the bow, the stiffer the spine. The lighter and weaker the bow, the more flexible the spine. So it's real critical that you get the right spine of arrow to match your bow. So like I said, you enter in your poundage, your arrow length and draw weight, and the tip weight, and calculator will just tell you exactly what spine to get. Now that's kind of a ballpark. They're not always 100% right, and I recommend trying a few different spines at first if you do have that option. You can't always do that, but if you call somebody like Three Rivers and you tell them your setup, they can kind of walk you through and guide you on that. Now I don't recommend going out right away and buying a dozen arrows. In fact, it's best if you can buy 2 or 3 different spined arrows and see what flies best out of your bow. And after you've got it tuned with that, then you can order more arrows. So a lot of times that's hard to do and you can't do it. So, if you buy a half dozen of correctly spined arrows according to a chart, you can fine tune it by the tip weight. These tips screw in or out of an insert, and then there's a threaded insert, and you can put a different weight insert in here. I mean, this little insert here weighs like 12 grains. Well, you can get inserts, up to 100 grains or even heavier. And you can change and test all these components with hot glue. And the way it is, you heat your tip up on the stove and just put it in there, and it'll loosen the glue up. And you can pull your insert out, try a different weight insert. You can change components up until this thing is flying just like you want. So that's how I would do that. Another real important thing to get worked out on this is to make sure your arrow is heavy enough. Now I recommend 10 grains per pound of bow weight. So for example, if you're shooting a 50-pound bow, you'd shoot a 500 grain arrow. If you're shooting a 30-pound bow, you're shooting a 300 grain arrow. Now the reason for that, you can go a lot heavier if you're hunting big, heavy, dangerous game and you want more penetration. A lot of 3D guys will go real light so their arrow gets better trajectory, but 10 grains per pound of bow weight is a really good standard for this. What happens if you use too light of an arrow, your bow does not absorb all the energy. Your arrow does not absorb all the energy into your bow. So in a sense, you're kind of dry firing it, and You know, it's going to be louder, it's going to be hard on the bow. If you're hunting, you're not going to get as good a penetration. So a good rule of thumb is 10 grains per pound of bow weight. Now when you buy carbon arrows, like this is a gold tip traditional shaft, and it will actually say on here it's 10.5 grains per inch. Now if that's to get the weight exactly where you want, you can buy your metal field points. You know, I buy them anywhere from 125 grains all the way up to 300 grains. So you've got your field point, and then like I mentioned before, you can get inserts that are weighted, and you can make that thing weigh just about what you want. Another thing is a lot of guys, most guys probably will, they'll have their draw length, and they'll cut that arrow shaft where they've got about an inch of excess sticking out. And that's the way probably forever people have done that. A thing people are doing now, because these carbon shafts are so light, it really doesn't matter as much, but guys are using a long uncut shaft. And what that does, that helps them have a shorter point on their gap shooting. I know that's kind of Greek right now, but it's really not necessary that you cut that down to your length unless you want to. Now the length of that arrow will affect the spine, so you need to take all that into consideration, but the main thing when buying arrows is to make sure that they are spined correctly to your bow poundage and draw length, and that they weigh the right amount. You're going to want to get your arrow shaft fletched with a good quality feather. Not a plastic vein like you used when you shot compounds, but a real turkey feather. Feathers just work a whole lot better with trad bows, especially if you're going to shoot off the shelf. These are 4-inch feathers. You can use 5-inch feathers. 5-inch stabilize a little bit better, especially if your bow is slightly out of tune or if you're using big broadheads. But if your bow is tuned, I like 4-inch because they're faster, and when you hunt, they're quieter. Also, you want to make sure you have them fletched helical. Now, helical means they spiral like a rifle bullet shooting down rifling. And you can get those left wing or right wing helical. It does not matter. You know, some people say if you're left-handed, you shoot one way. If you're right-handed, you shoot the other. It does not matter. Just make sure that if you get left wing or right wing, you do it consistently. The only time it matters if you use left or right wing helical is if you're hunting with single bevel broadheads. If you're hunting with a left bevel, single bevel broadhead, you want to use left wing helical. If you're hunting with a right bevel, single bevel broadhead, you want to use right wing helical. Other than that, it makes no difference. Starting out, you're going to want to buy your arrow shafts already fletched with feathers. That's something you're really not going to want to do yourself until you get a little bit more into this. I know I've thrown a lot at you guys. There's a whole lot of information about this arrow selection, and it can get pretty complicated. I recommend, if you're brand new to this, call somebody like Three Rivers and order from them. Lancaster Archery, and they'll kind of walk you through and steer you pretty close to exactly what you need. As you learn more about this and arrow tuning and everything, you can kind of choose what you want to do, but just let them guide you if you need to, you know, with the basics. Feel free to message me if you've got any questions, and I'll talk to you guys next time.